A very good afternoon to everyone. So poll has been lodged. Quickly answer me through poll. My audio is clear and my screen is visible. So today we are going to discuss ecosystem. Can anybody tell me what do you mean by ecosystem? Okay, we know that in the environment, both biotic and the abiotic components are present, right? Very good, Veena. So we know that in the environment, both abiotic and the biotic and the abiotic factors are present in the environment, right? And the interaction between the biotic and the abiotic component, that means the interaction between the living and the non-living things, is known as the ecosystem. That interaction is known as the ecosystem. Now we know that the ecosystem is a self-sustainable and the functional unit of nature. Self-sustainable means that not all the ecosystem are self-sustainable, but natural ecosystem, they are self-sustainable. That means they can regulate their system on their own. They are not dependent on others. And these ecosystems, they are vary in size. Like the pond ecosystem, they are smaller in size. The forest ecosystem, they are larger in size. So the size of the ecosystem, it vary. And the term ecosystem was coined by Translate. Now the earth, it constitutes a biosphere. Biosphere is the sum of all the local ecosystem. So it is the sum of all the ecosystem. And we also referred it as global ecosystem. So now the biosphere or the global ecosystem, it's very large, it's very complex. So we have divided it into two categories. One is the aquatic and the other one is terrestrial ecosystem. Aquatic includes river, pond, lake, wetlands. They all comes under the aquatic ecosystem. Terrestrial includes grasslands, forest, desert, and so on. These are the example of terrestrial ecosystem. Now, on the involvement of the humans, there are two types of ecosystem, natural and man-made ecosystem. Another name for the man-made ecosystem is anthropogenic ecosystem. We know that the natural ecosystem, they are self-sustainable. That means they can regulate their system on their own. Yes, Logesh. Very good. So we know that the natural ecosystem, they're self-sustainable. That means they are regulating their own system. They are not dependent on others. But the man-made ecosystem, which are anthropogenic ecosystem, they are regulated by humans. Right? For example, the crop field. We also call it as agro-ecosystem. This is the largest man-made ecosystem. Remember, this is the largest man-made ecosystem. And we are we humans, we are controlling or we are regulating this ecosystem, this crop field or the agro ecosystem, right? So Those ecosystems which involves the involvement, which includes the involvement of humans, are known as a man-made ecosystem. And there's some characteristics of the man-made ecosystem that they have a little diversity. As you can see in the image, this is a field. In this field, only one variety is growing. So in man-made ecosystem, you will observe little diversity. You will observe simple food chain. Like in aquarium. Aquarium is also a man-made ecosystem. We are providing the nutrient from outside to all the organisms which are present in the aquarium. So man-made ecosystem, they have little diversity, they have simple food chain, and they have high productivity. Remember this, the man-made ecosystem, they have high productivity because we are regulating that ecosystem. And humans, we are selfish. We need, like, for example, in agriculture, right? Agriculture is also an ecosystem, which is an agro ecosystem. So it is controlled by the humans for production of the food. So the man-made ecosystem, they have high productivity. And there are two aspects of the ecosystem. One is the structural aspect and the other one is the functional aspect. Structural aspects include the species composition and the stratification. Species composition means the type of the species and the number of individual of that species in an ecosystem. That defines its species composition. And stratification, like strata means layer. When you go to the forest, you will observe that the first layer will be occupied, the top layer will be occupied by the trees, right? Next would be occupied by shrubs, which is the second layer. Smaller to shrubs are herbs, so bottom layer would be occupied by the herbs. You can see this, there's a vertical distribution of different species and which are occupying the different level. This is what we call stratification. Strati means layers. Now let's discuss the functional aspect of the ecosystem. Functional aspect includes productivity, decomposition, energy flow, and the nutrient cycling. First, we are going to discuss productivity. The primary production is defined as the amount of biomass or the organic matter which is produced per unit area over a time period by plants during photosynthesis. This is the primary production. And when we talk about the rate of biomass production in a given area per unit time, that defines the productivity. Productivity comes when there's an involvement of time, when there's an involvement of rate. For example, this is a plant. We know that the plants, they are the producers because they perform photosynthesis. So the plant, they trap the light energy, they convert this physical energy which is the light energy into the chemical energy, and they will synthesize the organic matter. So the plants, which are the producer, they are producing organic matter through photosynthesis, let's say 800 gram. So this is the primary production of the plant. If I talk about a definite area, like this plant is growing in this area, so it's per meter square. If I talk about the production of 1 year, then mean there's an involvement of time. So year comes. So now is this 800 gram per meter square per area, it's a productivity. Now this is the amount of biomass or the organic matter which is produced by the plant through photosynthesis. Now, Not this total mass is transferred to the consumer. Let's say is the consumer, and this consumer is the herbivore. Okay, so the herbivore cannot consume the entire, because out of this 800, let's say 200 is utilized by the plant for respiration or for other metabolic activities. So that means out of 800, 200 has been utilized by the plant for respiration and the metabolic activities. So now how much is left is 600. This 600, which is available to the consumer, this is what we call net primary productivity. And this total production of the biomass, which is produced by the plant through photosynthesis, this is what we call as GPP, which is the gross primary productivity. Okay. And the productivity can be expressed in two forms. It can express in form of weight or energy. For weight, the unit is gram per meter square per year. For energy is kilocalorie per meter square per area per year. So the productivity can be expressed in weight as well as in energy. And there's a relation between the gross primary productivity and the net primary productivity. That because this is the relationship. Net primary productivity is the available biomass for consumption to the heterotrophs. Heterotrophs could be a herbivore or the decomposers. R represent the respiration, the amount of biomass which is utilized, or the energy which is utilized by the plants for respiration or for the other metabolic activity. And GPP is the total. Yes, Logesh. R means respiratory losses. Because starting it was, let's say example, it was starting is 800. 200 will be utilized by the plant for respiration or the respiratory losses. प्लांट्स को भी तो कुछ एनर्जी चाहिए ना अपने फंक्शंस परफॉर्म करने के लिए, रेस्पिरेशन परफॉर्म करने के लिए. प्लांट्स को भी तो एटीपी की रिक्वायरमेंट्स होती है, राइट? So will be 600 will be available. So out of the like 200 is lost for the respiratory losses, and 600 is the biomass which is available for the consumer or for the heterotroph, the herbivore or the decomposer. So this is the net primary productivity. This 800 is the gross primary productivity. Gross means total. And 200, this is a respiratory loss. And the primary productivity depends upon the variety of the environmental factors. Like it depends upon the photosynthetic capacity of the plant. For example, C4 plants, they're photosynthetically efficient plants because they lack photorespiration. They show high productivity. There's availability of nutrient also affect the primary productivity. Environmental factors could be a temperature, soil moisture. They also affect the primary productivity. So the biosphere productivity is 170 billion, but only 55 billion is the constituted by the aquatic ecosystem, and 115 billion tons is constituted by the terrestrial ecosystem. Though we know that the earth, it occupied majorly by the aquatic, right? By the aquatic bodies. But still we are getting the less productivity in the aquatic ecosystem. Why? Because the availability of the light, it decreases with the depth. If this is an ocean, and the bottom, no light will be available, or it's a no photic zone. So the availability of the light, it decreases with the depth. Next, we are going to discuss is decomposition. When decomposition is when the organic compounds, complex organic matter are broken down into inorganic substances. Inorganic substances could be a carbon dioxide, water, and nutrient. This is what we call decomposition. The entire process is known as decomposition. And decomposition, it includes 4 steps. Number 1 is fragmentation. Second is leaching. Third is catabolism. Fourth include humidification and mineralization. Let's discuss the first step, which is the fragmentation. The raw material of the decomposition is the detritus. Detritus is the remain of plants and animals. So this detritus, detrivore will act on the detritus. Detrivore could be an earthworm. So they will convert this detritus into a simple particles. This process, because the detritus is broken down into simple particles, this process is known as fragmentation. When the simple particles are formed, some of the water-soluble inorganic nutrients, they get dissolved in water. They leached into the soil and deposited as the unavailable salt. Right? Now these simple detritus particles, they are further degraded by the fungi and bacteria. And they are converted into inorganic nutrients. Let's say inorganic substances. This process is known as catabolism. Remember this, that fragmentation, catabolism, or leaching, they all are occurring simultaneously. That means they all are occurring at the same time during decomposition. And during decomposition, humidification and mineralization also occur. Humidification means the formation of humus. Remember all the properties of the humus, that is dark colored, it is highly resistant to microbial action, because of which the decomposition rate is very slow. It is an amorphous substance, it is colloidal in nature. Please remember all these points. The properties of humus are very important. And humus, they're generally formed before the catabolism step, okay? So once the humus is formed, now the microbes, they will act on the humus and they will degrade this humus so that the minerals, they get released into the soil. So the releasing of minerals into the soil, this is known as mineralization. Decomposition is largely an oxygen requiring process. Remember this, that is largely an oxygen requiring process. Decomposition, it depends upon the chemical composition of detritus and also on the chemical factor. It is very important that it depends upon the chemical composition of detritus and the climatic factor. For example, let's first discuss the detritus composition. If the detritus is consist of lignin and chitin, then decomposition would be slow. If the detritus is consist of rich in substance which are rich in nitrogen and water soluble substance like sugar, then the decomposition would be high. And we know that the climatic factors also affect the decomposition, right? So the temperature and soil moisture, they play a very important role. If the temperature is high or it's warm and the soil is moist, then or the environment is moist, then it will favor the decomposition. The decomposition rate will be higher. But if the temperature is low and if there's an anaerobic condition, we know that the decomposition require oxygen. Okay, so if there's a low temperature and anaerobic condition are there, then it will inhibit the decomposition. Remember these factors. These are very important. Like the chemical composition of the detritus and the climatic factors, they affect or they control the rate of the decomposition. Decomposition rate would be high if the detritus is rich in nitrogen and water soluble substance like sugar. Decomposition rate would be high if the temperature is warm and moist. If the environment is warm and moist, then the decomposition would be high. Decomposition will be slow when the detritus is rich in lignin and chitin. Decomposition would be slow when the temperature is low, when there's anaerobic condition. Remember this. Next, we are going to discuss the energy flow. We know that the sun is the only source of energy for all the ecosystem. Let me draw the sun. So the solar radiation which are coming from the sun, only less than 50% constitute the power, which is photosynthetically active radiation. This is 400 to 700 nanometer. This is the wavelength or the visible light which is taken by the plant to perform photosynthesis. So the plant, they can capture only 2 to 10% of the power. Remember this, that the plants, they can capture only 2 to 10% of the power. And the plants, they are known as the producers because they perform photosynthesis and they make their own food. So the plants, they are taking the solar energy, or we also call it as physical energy, and they're synthesizing the organic matter. It's the organic compound. So the plants, they're performing photosynthesis, right? That means they are using the solar energy or the physical energy, and they are synthesizing the chemical components or the chemical compounds. So here, the physical energy is converted into the chemical energy through the process called photosynthesis. Physical energy is the solar energy, and the chemical energy, it includes like the chemical intermediates which are formed during the photosynthesis. So here you can see that the one form of energy, which is a physical form of energy, is converted into the chemical energy or the chemical intermediate. So one form of the energy is transformed into the another form. This is the first law of thermodynamics, that the energy flow, it follows the first law of thermodynamics, that the energy neither be created nor be destroyed, but it is transferred from one form to the other. And in terrestrial ecosystem, the major producer are the herbaceous plants. In case of aquatic, ecosystem, the major producers are phytoplanktons, algae, and higher plants. We have already discussed the first law, now discuss the second law. Look at the image. We know that the plant, they cannot use all the energy which are coming from the sun. They can only use a certain part of it, and the large amount of the energy is lost in the form of heat. So when the energy is transferred from one form to the, when the energy is transferred, like at the each trophic level, when the herbivores, they are feeding on the plant. So when the energy is transferring from the producer to the consumer or to the herbivore, only a certain amount of energy will be passed on, less will be lost in the form of heat. Here also it is when the energy is passing, only a certain amount will be passing to the next trophic level. Some amount of energy is lost in the form of heat. This is the second law of thermodynamics, which says that no transfer of energy occurs unless and until it is accompanied by the degradation or the dissipation of the energy. That means for the transfer of energy from the one trophic level to the next, some amount of energy should be lost in the form of heat. Then only the transfer of energy will occur. Now, let's discuss the food chain. There's a process. We know that the process of eating and being eaten by other organism is called as food chain, right? And each trophic level in the food chain, we call it as trophic level. Let's discuss the grass. Grass is eaten by the grasshopper. Grasshopper is eaten by, let's say, frog. Frog is eaten by snake. And snake is eaten by bird. This is a food chain, right? And it includes producer, it includes consumer. And if the consumer die and the producer die, now the decomposer, they will act on it. So it also consists of decomposers. So the food chain, which consists of producers, consumers, and decomposer, they come under the grazing food chain. They form the grazing food chain. We also call it as a predator food chain. And in aquatic ecosystem, the major conduction of the energy flow occur through the grazing food chain, because in aquatic ecosystem we know that हर एक ऑर्गेनिज्म दूसरे ऑर्गेनिज्म को खा के अपनी एनर्जी नीड्स या एनर्जी रिक्वायरमेंट को फुलफिल कर रहा है. सो इन aquatic ecosystem, the grazing food chain is the major conduction for the energy flow. Second type of food chain is the detritus food chain. Detritus food chain, when it begins with the detritus. Here the detritus, decomposers, they will feed on it. Let's say earthworm. Earthworm will be eaten by, let's say, sparrow. Sparrow is eaten by another bird, which is a falcon. Here, it is starting with the detritus. So the food chain which begin with the detritus is known as a detritus food chain. It is made up of decomposers, which are heterotrophic organisms, mainly fungi and bacteria. And in the terrestrial ecosystem, the larger fraction of the energy, it flows through the detritus food chain, not through the grazing food chain. Grazing food chain se bhi hota hai, but the maximum portion or the maximum fraction of the energy flow, it occurs through the detritus food chain. And we know in the ecosystem, there's a grazing food chain is also occurring. There's a detritus food chain is also occurring. When these food chains, they get interlinked. For example, if the organisms which are present in the detritus food chain, they act as a prey for the organism in the grazing food chain. So both the food chain, they can interlinked, and the interconnection of these food chain, they form a food web. And the food web, they provide stability to the ecosystem. Because in food web, one animal can be eaten by the different animals. Okay, so one species can be eaten by the different animals. So now there's a choices among the animals. So the in food web, it provides stability to the ecosystem. Now look at the diagram. When we move from the lower trophic level to the higher trophic level, at the lower trophic level, there's a producers are present. And producers, they have the maximum energy, right? So when we move from the lower trophic level to the higher trophic level, the energy is decreasing because the energy is lost in the form of heat. At every trophic level, the energy is, some amount of energy is transferred and the rest of the energy is lost in the form of heat. So the energy is decreasing when we move from the lower trophic level to the higher trophic level. And we know that the organism at each trophic level, they are dependent on the organisms which are present in the lower trophic level. Like herbivores, they are dependent on the producers. This bird is dependent upon the herbivore. This top carnivore, they are dependent on the secondary consumer, right? So they are dependent on the organism which are present in the lower trophic level for their energy demand. Next come is the 10% law. According to the 10% law, only 10% of the energy is transferred at each trophic level from the lower trophic level, because most of the energy is lost in the form of heat. For example, if there's a producer, this producer is having a 10,000 joule. Only the 10% of the energy would be transferred to the next trophic level. So it will be in the next trophic level, the amount of energy reaching is 1,000. Now the 10% will be reached to the next trophic level, like 100. This is how. And because the energy, the some amount of energy is lost during this transfer of energy from the one trophic level to the next. So the trophic level, they also get restricted in the chain. This 10% law, it's also determined the number of trophic levels in the grazing food chain, because at one point there would be no energy will be available to transfer to the next trophic level. So the trophic level, the number of trophic level, they get restricted in the grazing food chain because of this 10% law, because only the some amount of the energy is transferred to the next trophic level and some amount will be lost in the form of heat. And there's one more important point, that a given species may occupy more than one trophic level in the same ecosystem, at the same time. For example, sparrow. Sparrow, it can act as a primary consumer when it feeds on seed, fruit, peas, and it can also act as a secondary consumer when it feeds on the insects and worms. So the given species can occupy more than one trophic level in the same ecosystem at the same time. Logesh, I've already explained the 10% law. Now let's discuss the ecological pyramid. The graphical representation of the various ecological parameters at the successive trophic level. So the ecological pyramid, that the graphical representation of the various ecological parameter. Parameters could be a biomass, it could be a number, and it could be energy. So this one is the parameter of pyramid of number in a grassland ecosystem. As you know that the pyramid, they have a triangular shape. They have a broader base and they have pointed at the apex. So they have a triangular shape. When we obtain this type of pyramid, we call it as upright pyramid. So the pyramid of number in the grassland ecosystem is an upright pyramid. Here, the producer, they occupy the maximum number. And as we move from the lower trophic level to the higher trophic level, the number is decreasing. Okay, so in case of the pyramid of number in the grassland ecosystem is an upright pyramid. And in aquatic ecosystem, the pyramid is also upright because there will be photoplanktons which are larger in number. Photoplanktons will be eaten by the zooplankton, which are less in number as compared to photoplanktons. The zooplanktons will be eaten by the small fishes, then large fishes, right? So the pyramid of number in aquatic ecosystem is also upright. In tree ecosystem, the pyramid is inverted or spindle shape. Let's say it's a tree, because number of trees are less and the birds which are feeding on the trees would be more. And if the parasites are present on the birds, so the parasite numbers will be more, right? So here we are obtaining the inverted pyramid. So in tree ecosystem, the pyramid could be inverted or spindle shape. For example, if there's a tree is eaten by bird. Sorry, birds are feeding on the tree, and let's say this bird is eaten by another top carnivore bird, which is hawks. Okay, so this shape we call it as spindle shape. So in tree ecosystem, the pyramid is inverted shape or it could be spindle shape. The pyramid of biomass. So pyramid of biomass in the terrestrial ecosystem is upright. But pyramid of biomass in the aquatic ecosystem is inverted because the biomass of the phytoplanktons are microscopic, they're very small in size. So the biomass of the phytoplanktons is less as compared to the biomass of the zooplanktons, which are feeding on the phytoplanktons. So the biomass, the pyramid of biomass in the aquatic ecosystem is inverted. Now let's discuss the third pyramid, which is a pyramid of energy. So the pyramid of energy is always upright. Remember, this is always upright because the flow of the energy is unidirectional. It's very important. Remember this, that the flow of energy is unidirectional. And when we move from the lower trophic level to the higher trophic level, the energy is decreasing because you can see this, there's a 10% law is applicable, that only the 10% of the energy is transferred to the next trophic level. So remember this, that the pyramid of energy, whether it's an aquatic ecosystem, whether it's a terrestrial ecosystem, the pyramid of energy is always upright. Next, we are going to discuss the ecological succession. So the gradual and the fairly predictable change in the species composition of a given area is known as ecological succession. We know that the community composition and its structural component, it changes with the change in environment, right? And these changes, they are parallel, they are occur in a sequence with the change in the physical environment. And the changes keep on occurring until the community it reaches to the equilibrium. It reaches near to the equilibrium, which is the climax community. And the climax community is the stable community. You can see in this image, first there's a barren landscape, okay? And slowly, gradually the new species are colonizing this area, and later they form a climax community, which is the forest. So the gradual, that means the slow changes, predictable because these changes are predictable. Change in the species composition of a given area is known as an ecological succession. And the ecological succession, there are two types, primary succession and secondary succession. Primary succession, it occurs in the area where there is no living organism. For example, here there's no living organism, there's a barren rock. So this bare rock, first it will convert into soil, and this weathering of this rock and formation of soil, it requires hundreds or thousands of years. That is why we call that primary succession is a very slow process, because the formation of the soil took 100 or thousands of years. Once the soil is formed, now these primer species, because the primer species, they consist of lichen. I'm taking an example of Xerac succession, where the succession is taking place in a dry area. So let's say here's the lichen. Pioneer species, the pioneer species are those species which are the first one to colonize the area. So they're the lichens. Now these lichen, they secrete some kind of acid which causes the weathering of the rocks, which help in the weathering of the rock and result in the formation of soil. Now the pioneer, after the pioneer species, there's an intermediate community. Now last one is the climax community, which is the stable community. These intermediate communities are also known as the serial community, and we also call it as transitional community. And this entire sequence, which includes the pioneer community, the intermediate community, or the transitional community, or serial community, or the climax community. This entire sequence, we call it as SEER. So primary succession, they usually occurs on the area where there's no living organism, for example, bare rocks or the lava. But secondary succession, it occurs in the area where there's a natural biotic components are present, but because due to disturbances or some natural calamities, these species, they got destroyed, such as abandoned farmlands, the land that has been flooded. Here the secondary succession takes place because here the soil is already present. The soil is already present, the sediments are already present. So the secondary succession, it occurs at a very faster rate as compared to the primary succession. So this is first come is the pioneer community. After pioneer is the intermediate. After intermediate comes the climax community, which is the forest or the stable community. So some changes occur during the ecological succession. Number one is that the productivity or the biomass increases. First, there's the increase in biomass. Second, you will observe from the little diversity. First, it was a very little diversity, or little species are present. Now, in the climax community, you can see the maximum species. So the diversity increases. And whether it's a hydrax succession, the succession which takes place in the water, or whether it's a Xerac succession, the succession which takes place in the dry areas. Both the succession, they leads to a condition called mesic. Mesic means where the water or the medium water conditions are present. That means not too dry or not too wet. So this is an example of Zirac succession where the succession is taking place in the dry area. You can see there's a rocks are present. The first lichen will come. The lichen, they will secrete some kind of acid, and these acid, they will help in the weathering of the rocks and help in the formation of the soil. Later comes the mosses, after moss. Now the mosses, after mosses would be annual grasses, then perennial grasses, then shrubs, then finally, the forest will be formed, which is the climax community or the most stable community. Next, we are going to discuss the ecological succession in water. Here, the pioneer community, they are the phytoplanktons. After phytoplankton, there's a submerged plants. After submerged plants, there's a submerged free-floating plant stages. Then there's a reed swamp stages, there's a marsh meadow stages, then shrub stage, and later comes the forest, which is the climax community. Please remember the sequence. Sequence is very important. Sometimes you get a direct question on the sequence. So please remember the sequence of the Zirac succession as well as on the Hydrax succession. This sequence is very important. Now we are going to discuss the nutrient cycle. We know that every organism, they require nutrient for their growth, for their metabolic activities, right? And the exchange of this nutrient between the biotic component and the abiotic component, this is what we call a nutrient cycle. And the amount of nutrient which is present in the soil at a given time is referred as a standing state. Remember this. And there are two types of nutrient cycle. Number one is the gaseous, second one is sedimentary. Gaseous, when the source or the reservoir source is atmosphere. Gaseous cycles include like carbon cycle, hydrogen cycle, there's oxygen, there's nitrogen cycle. Sedimentary, when the reservoir or the source is the earth crust. It includes sulfur or phosphorus. And the environmental factors, they also regulate the rate of release of nutrient into the atmosphere. And these environmental factors, it includes soil, moisture, pH, temperature. Now let's discuss the carbon cycle. Carbon constitutes 49% of the dry weight of organism. At global level, it includes 71% of the carbon is dissolved in the ocean. Major reservoir of the carbon are the fossil fuels, and the carbon cycling, it occurs through atmosphere, ocean, through living and the dead organism. As you can see in the image, the carbon is released into the atmosphere through the respiratory activities of the producers and the consumer, through decomposition. When the decomposition is taking place, some amount of carbon dioxide is also released when we are burning fossil fuels or we are burning forests. Then also the carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere. Human activities, they have significantly influenced the carbon cycle because we are rapidly cutting down the forest. So rapid deforestation, it's affecting the carbon cycle. We are utilizing or over exploiting the fossil fuels. It is also affecting the carbon cycle because if the level of the carbon dioxide will increase in the atmosphere, it is leading to the global warming. Next one is the phosphorus cycle. We know that the phosphorus is the major constituent of the biological membrane, nucleic acid, and the cellular energy transfer, that is ATP. And the reservoir of phosphorus is rocks, which contains phosphorus in the form of phosphate. There's a rock minerals are present. When the rocks are weathered, they release the phosphorus which is present in the soil. Now the phosphate, they dissolve in the soil solution. Now the producers or the plant, they will uptake this phosphate which is present in the soil solution. If the consumer, they will feed on the producers, now the phosphorus will enter into the consumer. And when the consumer plus the little fall from the producer, that is plant. They will act as a detritus. So the dead consumer and the litter fall, they will act as a detritus, which is the remains of the plants or animals. Now the decomposers, they will act on it. They will act on the detritus, and against the phosphorus will be released into the soil. This is how the nutrient cycling is taking place. Please remember this sequence, it's very important. Next one is the ecosystem services. We know that the ecosystem is providing a lot of services, which includes purifying air, water. Mitigate means reduces the drought and the flood condition, cycle nutrients, generate fertile soil, provide wildlife habitat, maintain biodiversity, pollinate crops, provide storage site for carbon, and also provide aesthetic, cultural, and the spiritual values. So these are the services which are provided by the ecosystem. So there's a scientist called Robert Constanza and his colleagues. They put a price tag for these services which are given by the ecosystem, and the price includes the US dollar 33 trillion. And distribution of the price is like 50% is for the soil formation, less than 10% is for recreation and nutrient cycling, 6% is for climate regulation, and 6% is for habitat for wildlife. So this is the distribution of the price tag, which was put on the fundamental ecosystem services. I hope it is clear to everyone. Now let's discuss the question, which of the following statement is not correct? 1. The pyramid of biomass in sea is generally inverted. Pyramid of biomass in sea is generally upright. Pyramid of energy is always upright. Pyramid of number in grassland ecosystem is upright. Quickly answer what you think, what will be the correct option. Gauri, they're asking not correct. It's very good, Veena. Very good, Gauri. Logesh, Ritu, what do you think? What will be the correct option? So the question is asking which of the following is not correct. Very good, Ritu. The pyramid of biomass in sea is generally inverted, right? In sea, you will observe phytoplanktons, right? And the phytoplanktons, they are microscopic in nature. They're very small in size. But the zooplanktons, they are larger in size as compared to the phytoplanktons. So you will observe this inverted biomass in sea. Inverted pyramid of biomass. So the question is asking which of the statement is not true. One says the pyramid of biomass in sea is generally inverted, right? Pyramid of biomass in sea is generally upright. This is wrong. Pyramid of energy is always upright. Remember this, the pyramid of energy, whether it is terrestrial ecosystem, whether it's an aquatic ecosystem, the pyramid of energy is always upright. For example, there's a 10,000 zoom. From the producer to the next trophic level, only 1,000 is reaching, from only the here reaching only 100 joule, and next is 10 joule. Okay, so you can see this, the energy is decreasing when we are moving from the lower trophic level to the higher trophic level, and the flow of energy is unidirectional. So the pyramid of energy is always upright. Pyramid of number in the grassland ecosystem is upright. Yes, pyramid of number in grassland ecosystem is upright. So the correct option is 2. Moving next, the rate of decomposition is faster in ecosystem due to the following factor, except. Option 1 is detritus is rich in sugar. Option 2 is warm and moist environment. Option 3 is presence of aerobic soil microbes. Option 4 is detritus rich in lignin and chitin. What do you think? What will be the correct option? Very good, Gauri. Very good, Veena. Question is asking the rate of decomposition is faster in the ecosystem due to the following factors, except detritus, which is rich in sugar. Yes, the rate of decomposition would be faster. Warm and moist environment. Yes, warm and moist environment, they also favor decomposition. Presence of aerobic soil microbes. Yes, but detritus, which is rich in lignin and chitin, rate of decomposition here will be slow. So the fourth is the correct option. Moving next, match the trophic level with the correct species example in a grassland ecosystem. A is the fourth trophic level, B is second trophic level, C is first trophic level, D is third trophic level. And here crow is given, vulture is given, rabbit is given, and grass is given. Very good, Gauri. Very good, Shushant. So let's say first grass. Grass would be eaten by rabbit. Rabbit would be by crow, be eaten by vulture. This is the top carnivore. Grass, they are the producers. Now let's match. First trophic level would be grass. Let's say with A. Fourth trophic level would be vulture. So A would be 2. B is second trophic level. Second would be rabbit. B would be third. First trophic level, grass. This is the first trophic level. D is third trophic level. Third trophic level is crow. So D1, C fourth, B3, A2. Correct option is second. Next one is in relation to the gross primary productivity and the net primary productivity of an ecosystem, which one of the following statement is correct? There is no relationship between the gross primary productivity and the net primary productivity. Second is the gross primary productivity is always less than the net primary productivity. Third is gross primary productivity is always more than net primary productivity. And the fourth is gross primary productivity and then net primary productivity are one and the same thing. Very good, Gauri. Very good, Veena. So GPP, gross primary productivity, is the total. And when the respiratory losses are removed from the total, the amount we are getting is the net or the net primary productivity. Let's say it's 800, respiratory loss is 200, we are getting 600. So net primary productivity is always less than the gross primary productivity, or gross primary productivity is always more than the net primary productivity. Option 1 is saying that there's no relationship between the gross primary productivity and net primary productivity. No, there's a relationship. Gross primary productivity is always less than the net primary productivity. No, gross primary productivity is always more than the net primary productivity. Third says gross primary productivity is always more than the net primary productivity. This is the correct statement. Gross primary productivity and net primary productivity are one and same. No, they are different. This is the total biomass which is produced by the producer during photosynthesis. This is the amount of biomass which is available to the consumer. Okay, so they are not same, they are different. I hope it is clear to everyone. Thank you all for your participation. We are winding up the class. Thank you all. See you in the next class and have a nice day.